To me, the key to writing successful history, whether it's fiction or nonfiction, is to see that word inside history. We tend to think it's facts, it's dates, it's, heroes and villains and things like that, which it is. But mostly you can write a good history, whether it's true or imaginary, by focusing on story, okay? And everybody can do it. Everybody knows what makes a good story. I'm going to ask you very quickly, she gave you pieces of paper. There's not a quiz or anything. I would like you very quickly to jot down a person in history, an event in history, a fact in history, or something that you're just curious about that has to do with history. I'm giving you like 5 seconds. There's not a quiz. Sure. So a fact, a person, an oddity, time or place or anything. Just jot it down. There, you're done. Now, you can all go home now because this is what it's about. It's about building some kind of a story. Just like stories, history has its heroes and its villains. Like, don't look at me like I'm the teacher. Who would be a hero in history? Yeah.
I just read a biography of Gertrude Bell where people who are not necessarily villains were presented as villains as they were against her particular political goals in opposition. Very
good. That's a good example. Anybody think of a villain? Benedict Arnold. This is not a hard question. Plot twist. History has plot twists. Just like any kind of work of fiction. Can you give me one?
The beginning of the First World War.
I would say what we're going through right now has its plot twist, don't you think?
Yeah.
Back and forth and up and down, you don't know what's going to happen. History has a lot of periods like that. Surprise beginnings and endings. Can you think of a surprise beginning or ending that involves a historical event?
We don't think about it today, but no one saw World War I coming.
Exactly. The Archduke was assassinated. Bing, we're in World War I. At the end of World War II, did we see the bomb coming? But that was an ending, right? Okay, that was a surprise ending. We also have captivating minor characters. Those are some of my favorite people to build a history around. It's not Hitler. Everybody writes about Hitler, but who might be a minor character?
Rudolf Hess.
What's that?
Rudolf Hess.
Rudolf Hess. Or I would love to write about Hitler. They say there was one good thing about Hitler, and he loved dogs. He loved dogs. I would love to write about Hitler through the eyes of his dog. And then overarching ideas and themes, like any kind of story, there are themes in history. There are overarching ideas in history, like?
Change.
Well, change, but I'm thinking of periods like the Cold War. That's kind of a theme, the Cold War. The Enlightenment. Okay, so there are those kinds of overarching themes that go along with historical periods. So good writers, this is my favorite quote, good writers of history understand what Faulkner said. The past is never dead. It is not even past. And I truly believe this is one of the most true things about being a good writer of history. The way that people behave, greed, unselfishness, cowardice, all the kind of things that human beings are known for throughout time, Shakespeare understood them all. They're still with us, and they are still causing history to happen. And so lots of times I feel like that's a key for me. I had an editor one time that said that was what my gift was, and I never understood it. But she said I was able to make historical people seem real, seem modern somehow. But I think that's because I have such a strong sense of how human character, I have a lot of empathy in many ways, how human character is really universal throughout time. It doesn't change a whole lot. So anyway, I like that one. This is one of my favorite cartoons. Those who don't study history are doomed to repeat it. Yet those who do study history are doomed to stand by helplessly while everyone else repeats it. And I really think that's true. History repeats itself. We watch, now, history repeating itself. The challenge for writers is to make something in the past seem contemporary and relatable. I think in some way you have to make it possible for a reader to put themselves into your history, feel like they're there, feel like it has something to say to them personally. And a skillful writer of history makes the past seem present somehow, figuring out how you can make it seem contemporary. I'm going to tell you my story is that I am old, okay? I published all my books through traditional publishers, okay? And I was growing up in the time before, I was becoming a writer in the time before Facebook, all this networking, all the stuff. And after about 20 years, my books went out of print. Now, the publishers didn't want to republish them, but they didn't want to give me my rights back. It was just awful. And I had to really fight to get the rights to my own books back, because what happened was I wanted to become more modern, get with the program. Aren't we in the 21st century now? Yeah. And published my books as ebooks. And they're coming out October 15th, all of them as ebooks. And the first one that I wrote is called Spite Fences. This is the Laurel Leaf edition, but it was published by Random House. And this is what the cover looked like. All my books have something to do with social justice. This has to do with racial justice and the Jim Crow laws in the South.
I will need to read your books.
Huh?
Good.
Good. I will help yourself. You can get them on, if you wait till October 15th, you can read them on Kindle. I don't know how to read them on Kindle. I just got somebody to do it for me. But anyway, it's about the separate restrooms. Here's the new ebook, and I just love the cover. Again, it's about, it's really about the lunch counter strikes during the 1960s. And it's about a black man. He's just like a little street peddler. And he happens to give this young white woman a camera. And what she does with it is to, with the camera, show people in the community the many brutal ways in which black people in her community are treated at the hands of whites. So this was my first one. The next one is called Kinship, and I forgot to bring the cover. This is a book about economic injustice. And what it has to do with, it's set in a trailer park. With a young girl, they don't have much to eat, they don't have much of anything. But it's about how she comes to believe and learn that her community, her dispossessed, economically left behind community, is really a family for her. So that's kind of what it's about. And of course, economic injustice is something that we're dealing with today. So the past is not really past. Another one I wrote is called Uncommon Faith, and I love the cover that they did when it first came out. This is about a young rebellious girl in 1837. And my friends would say to me, what are you working on? And I said, I'm working on 1837. And their eyes would just glaze over. Like, what's so special about 1837? Well, 1837, 1830s were a lot like the 1960s in terms of the 19th century. There were a lot of movements for justice for women, for African Americans. There were people like Dorothea Dix, who was looking at mental health. You just have all these kind of reform movements. People were against drinking, and so there was a lot happening in 1837. But anyway, this is about a rebellious young girl. Women at that time were expected to sew. She wasn't going to have any of it. She didn't want to sew. She was not able to have an education because there were no colleges for women. And so it's a book about how she comes to put down her sewing and turn the world and her community upside down. I think it's a beautiful cover. I mean, the red hair, she's got this fiery spirit, but she's different from everybody else. And by God, she doesn't want to sew. Okay. And then this one is called Fallout. This one, it's really funny because I had to review all these books to have them made into ebooks. I think this is really still relevant, and I'm only saying that because I was surprised. This has a lot to do with the 1950s when there was, you've ever heard of Eugene McCarthy?
Yes.
Okay, and he was accusing people of being communists, and there were all kind of gossip and rumor that was being spread around. And also in the 50s, there was a lot of anti-science. Robert Oppenheimer, who helped create the bomb, okay? He was chastised. They accused him of being disloyal, anti-American and all. He lost all his abilities to do his scientific work. So there was a lot of, we have that today, anti-science. There was a lot of fake news, a lot of anti-intellectualism. There's a really strong strain in American history of being suspicious of people who can think, okay? I don't know if anybody can relate to that today, but oh well. Anyway, but I had to create this story with a background to it, and you probably can't tell, but you see her eye there? This takes place in 1954 when in North Carolina there were 3 major hurricanes that year. And so the anti-intellectual, McCarthy stuff is set against the background of these 3 hurricanes. So that's sort of like a hurricane eye. Isn't that cool? See, I just think that's so cool. So anyway, I'm still having fun with this stuff. So anyway, so the goal with these new editions is to make the past seem present. Okay, but there's a question. How do you do that? How do you make the past seem present? What are the tricks? And if you have to write down anything, this is what you might write down. It's no mystery that writing good history is just like writing good fiction. It doesn't make any difference whether it's nonfiction or fiction. The same techniques really apply. Except that the world that you're trying to depict already exists. You're not creating it. So you're stuck with the facts, the people, the history. Now, we read a lot of fantasy nowadays, and writers go to workshops to learn about something called world building. You ever heard of that before? Okay, this big, world building is big right now. That's kind of nice, because if you're a writer that does world building, all you've got to do is get your reader to believe your world, okay? When you're working with nonfiction or you're working with history, you got to make sure you get all your facts straight, because the world is there for you. You're not really creating it. So there's that. The world of history writing comes with built-in constraints in the form of real events, facts, people, and settings. So you have all that. And it's no mystery that imaginative fiction and historical fiction must both exist in worlds that are believable, both of them. It's no mystery that your first obligation is to find a way in. This was what I was meant to tell you to write down. How do you find your way in? Because I think these are just some little techniques that you can use. If you want to write an interesting history, you might start with or weave through your story a fascinating fact that few people know. You might come up with a discrepancy, something that just doesn't kind of make sense, and you can weave that through your story. You can take an oddity, you can take a symbol, you can take an interesting parallel to modern times, and I'll give you examples of all these. But when you talk about the historical time you want to write about, these are some things to think about, weaving through your story, or starting with, or ending with. So here's an example. Here's the first one. It's called A Fascinating Fact That Few People Know. Anybody ever heard of a whipping boy? What is a whipping boy?
Someone who would be punished instead of usually the wealthy aristocrat who had indeed done the...
Right, the king's son, or the upcoming, what do you call the upcoming king? The heir or something to the throne. They never were getting punished. But if they did something wrong, they actually had somebody called a whipping boy that would be punished instead of the heir to the throne. okay? George Washington's teeth. I know. Here's the thing from the whipping boy. All right, there they are. There are many, many sets of George Washington's teeth all over the world. And what I would like to tell you is this. He had a lot of trouble with his teeth because one of his favorite things was nuts. He liked nuts. And of course, those will wear down your teeth. He also loved wine. And of course, you know what wine does to your teeth. So, I mean, he had teeth problems. If I was going to write about George Washington, what I would do is I would begin by setting him in the winter of Valley Forge. What do you know about Valley Forge? Cold. Desperate. The feet were bleeding. They were wrapped in rags. I mean, the soldiers were miserable. But guess what? During Valley Forge, George Washington had an enormous toothache. He was in great pain with his teeth. So during Valley Forge, he had to send to Philadelphia, and he got a dentist by the name of John Green, who came out and helped him out so George could, help his soldiers withstand Valley Forge. To me, that's kind of a way in. Do you see what I'm saying? Anyway, that's what I think, anyway. Discrepancies. We know about the famous, brilliant Sir Isaac Newton, the mathematician, discovered gravity, or not didn't discover it, observed it, proved it, did something mathematically with it that I don't really understand. But he was also kind of a crank. He was hoping to find the Philosopher's Stone or something that would turn, you've heard of Rumpelstiltskin's straw into gold. So he had this idea he was spending a lot of time looking what was the origin of fire and things like that. So there's kind of a discrepancy. We would think today that those were, dark alleys that wouldn't lead anywhere. It'd be like going down a rabbit hole. But yet Newton went down many rabbit holes, despite his reputation of being, this brilliant mathematician. Aristotle was a misogynist. You've heard of the famous Aristotle. They always go Aristotle and Plato, but he was a misogynist, and that's not anything you would necessarily know. So that might be a place to begin your story. And of course, Thomas Jefferson's affair with the slave, there's something that's a discrepancy there. There's something that's kind of off. The great Thomas Jefferson wrote the Declaration of Independence, but was with Sally Hemings for many, many decades. So, those are interesting ways. Fawn Brodie, who wrote about Jefferson and Sally Hemings, did just a masterful work of historical research and uncovering things that we didn't know about. An unusual point of view. I talked to you about Hitler's dog, but I asked Elizabeth to get me a copy of this. This is just a children's book by Jane Yolen. It's called Encounter. And of course, everybody knows the Christopher Columbus story. But this is told from the point of view of a young boy that's on the island when the ship comes. And one of the things he doesn't understand is the way these people who have come on these ships, how they look, they're so different from him. Their skin is just different from theirs. And there's some other pictures in the book that help you see. Let's see if I can find one. I want to take, gold. They've not really seen gold before. So it's a different point of view. It's from the point of view of the islander who is there when Columbus comes. One of the things about this book that I wrote called Uncommon Faith, this is the heroine, but there's not a single chapter in the book that focuses on her. Everything in the book, every chapter is about the people in her community who are observing her. I don't know if you've ever had a rebellious young girl on your street. What the neighbors say, what the pastor says, what her mother's friends say. So it works kind of like this, kind of different point of view because she is the main character, but I get at her by what other people think. An oddity. What do you know about Babe Ruth and the cabbage leaf? Babe Ruth had this habit. He really had, was a superstition. He would get hot, and he would keep a cabbage, and he would change out a cabbage leaf and put it on his head, and then his hat on top of it. You know, I don't know if that cooled him down so that he could be a better slugger. Have you heard that before, Ruth? Yeah. But it's just that's kind of like an oddity, and I think that's interesting. The great Babe Ruth would do this kind of thing. Yeah, yeah, I would think it probably would. There probably is some really efficacy in it. I don't know, but it's an oddity. If you read The Invention of Wings by Sue Monk Kidd, that book is about Sarah Grimke, and she was a wealthy young Southerner, and she was given on her birthday, I think her 12th birthday, she was given the gift of a slave girl, and she rejected that gift. Unlike most of the girls of her time, she didn't want to have a slave. So a lot of the story is based on that choice of hers. So there he is, see? Maybe he's got a cabbage leaf underneath that hat. So I tend to use symbolism. I like to use symbols to get into the story. One of the big plot points is always the fence. In Spite Fences, we keep walls up to keep other people out, to keep only certain people in our neighborhood, okay? To put up our fences so we can keep the riffraff out. Today we talk about walls, don't we? Building walls, building fences. So we are still seeing a world in which we erect fences against each other. So that fence is a symbol. In Uncommon Faith, the sampler that the girls are set to sew, throughout the book, throughout the novel, they're sewing at different points. And so it's a thread, sorry about that, that winds its way through the story as kind of a symbol. And then in Fallout, the hurricanes of 1954, the culture is just in a big hurricane, but so is literally the town that I portray in this book. Okay, so here are the different, okay, it's no mystery that historical fiction writers, like fiction writers, make use of detailed timelines. And that's one of the things I'm going to ask you guys to do right now. I'd like you to take your piece of paper. It helps to turn it sideways. Okay.
Does anyone else need paper?
And you can do your whole life today at the library. You might want to make a horizontal line across the middle. You can do this with your life because it's easy today, but you can do it with a historical figure or a historical time. And start with the date you were born. Mine would be a long time ago. And the date today. So to the left of the page is when you were born. To the right of the page is, well, we don't know. It was today. We don't know when we're going to kick off, but we know that we're here today. So let's put today. Would be on the, one of the things I did for my different books is I'd make a timeline of Spite Fences has to do with 1960 when they had the lunch counter strikes. Fallout and the Cold War had to do with 1950 to 54, the witch hunts, and so on. Uncommon Faith had founding of Mount Holyoke and education for women and so on. So what I want you to do is this. Take 3 or 4 significant things in your life and put them on your timeline, kind of in chronological order. Maybe you broke your leg in 3rd grade and were laid up for 2 years, or you got married at some point. So think of...
Do you put in the dates too?
If you can. You don't have to be totally accurate because we don't care at this point. But just put in, maybe when you got married, maybe when you had your first child, maybe when you got divorced, maybe when you had to take care of your sick mother. Just 3 or 4 different things. Good, you're done. Okay. Then underneath the line, kind of below your line down here, what you might want to do is write down things that were emotionally gripping to you. If you had a younger brother who drowned or something, that would be an emotional situation. If you had a divorce at some point, that would be an emotional situation. If you had a victory in which you won this high school, beanpole jumping, is there such a thing? I don't know. When you you won something in high school, okay, so you put that down, or you were valedictorian of your college class. Do they have valedictorians in college? I don't know. Whatever. So things that would be emotional is kind of put down below that line. And young people like Rob over here, he's got a long way to go.
He's closer to it, like I can't remember.
It's okay, it's all right. Now, over the top, right up here at the top, I always take it, sorry Alexis. Over the top, try to put down some cultural things that you remember from those time periods. What president do you remember? What movie star do you remember? What song do you remember? What, what else do we have in our culture? Movie stars, sports figures, political events. What do you remember? Because I do remember, this is how old I am, but I do remember seeing Elvis Presley on television. I mean, our whole family gathered around the television set, and man, that was big. So that would be an example of a cultural thing. And then out to the left of the timeline, out to the left, put down the names of significant people in your life. It doesn't have to be a lot of them. It doesn't have to be all your Facebook friends. Significant people in your life. And then out to the right along here, okay, stick in places, scenes or places or settings. The place you used to go to make out in high school, okay? The place where you got married. So it would be scenes. Did anybody come up with anything that popped into their mind they hadn't thought of, that just came back to them, that they're just, anybody?
The bicentennial.
The bicentennial, that's a good one. I remember the tall ships. My
Yeah.
daughter was born during the bicentennial. What else? Anything else you remember?
I remember watching Vietnam War on TV.
Absolutely.
All the time,
Yeah,
And we were shh, shh, shh.
yeah. Kennedy's death. Yeah. Anybody else? Anyway, to see how those things come to mind. Now, what you really have is a start of a memoir of your own history, of your own life, but you can do this same kind of thing with whoever you're working on for your historical fiction or your real history. And it helps, it's sort of like a brain dump, where you put out as many things as you can possibly think of. So that was just a little exercise that maybe might help you. I did it's a scholarly biography called Fanny Seward, A Life. And this one was the footnotes from hell. There are more footnotes in here than there are pages to read practically, but I love this cover. It was published by Syracuse University Press. And this is Fanny Seward, and she was painted by Emanuel Leutze, and this portrait hangs in their family home. Emanuel Leutze was the same artist who painted Washington crossing the Delaware. So the family could afford a pretty nice painter. I got interested in her after I read a book called Team of Rivals. And you've heard of Doris Kearns Goodwin. And in that book, I learned that Lincoln put into his cabinet all his greatest competitors for the presidential nomination. I'm gonna hold that up a little bit more. And because he wanted the best and the brightest minds. I also found out that Mr. Seward, William Seward, who was Lincoln's Secretary of State, had a daughter, Fanny Seward, who kept a diary all through the Civil War years. From the time, she kept it for about 8 years. And I got curious to learn about her. Nobody had ever written about her before. And I found out that the University of Rochester had all of her diaries. And they covered about 8 years. She wrote in it every day. I looked at microfilms. It took me 7 years to write this. But what I felt was important about this book was she told me about something that I never knew anything about. It has to do with the Lincoln assassination. Everybody knows about John Wilkes Booth and Ford's Theater and all that. I didn't know there was a conspiracy to kill the vice president, okay, to kill General Grant, who only escaped because his wife Julia did not like Mrs. Lincoln and made an excuse not to go to the theater that night. So the Grants were not there. But Secretary Seward was his Secretary of State. And the assassins came into his house that same night in which Booth assassinated Lincoln and attempted to assassinate Fanny's father. And she was an eyewitness to that whole scene. And the whole thing was in her diary. And I thought, oh my gosh, nobody knows about this. Did you guys know about this? I didn't know anything about it. So I thought, I have got to find out about this. Sort of like you finding out about General Sherman and, you know, the nuns and the nuns. There's a theme here, the nuns. So, but anyway, the nuns are great people. They do great things for the world. So anyway, I did a timeline. Now, it didn't look like this, but I did a timeline as I was capturing the details of her life. And I put it together for you guys. It's not any different from what we just did. But I took when she was born and then when she died. And I put the significant events on there in the middle. The assassination attempt on her father. Do you know that her father and her brother were two of the 5 people that were in the room when Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation? Fanny Seward was in the building while her brother and her father were helping Lincoln sign the Emancipation Proclamation. So same thing. Events of the cultural things at the time, like you had all the frou-frou Victorian furniture all around the place. So, you know, that was there. Photography was just coming into being. So, you know, that's in there. Significant people in her life. Significant emotional events are at the bottom. Places that were significant in her life are off to the right. But for me, it's a way of keeping track of a lot of that. And so many of the details were important. If I had her at a party wearing a blue dress, I had to make sure she had a blue dress on from her diaries. So I now wear trifocals. I used to wear bifocals, but looking at all those microfilms was really hard, but it was just, you get obsessed, isn't that right? When you start writing something, don't you get obsessed and you just have to finish it? So there's that. I want to show you very quickly, oh, now I'm getting it. I was very lucky, and I don't know how to pull this up, Elizabeth, but the publisher did a book trailer for me, and I was so thrilled because I thought that was, yeah, do you know how to make that go? I have a book trailer. I mean, and that is so modern. I mean, it's like I have a Facebook page and a book trailer. But they had a graduate student make this for me, and hopefully he passed the class. I'll tell you a funny story about it after it's over. But you can learn a little bit about her and why I was interested. There. You know that song?
Daughter of Secretary of State William Seward, Fanny Seward's diary entries from 1858 to 1866 are the foundation of Krisher's vivid portrait of the young girl who was an eyewitness to one of the most tumultuous periods in American history.
Can you hear it okay?
1865 still seems so fresh in Fanny Seward.
I do not remember hearing voices outside Father's sick room, but something led me to think that my brother Fred was there with someone else.
The broad-shouldered stranger at the door of the Seward mansion held a package of medicine in his left hand. He kept his right hand inside his coat pocket. He insisted on going upstairs and giving Secretary of State William Seward the medicine personally. Denied entrance, the stranger left the hall and made for the steps. Frederick Seward, the son, stopped him.
I hastened to the door, opened it a very little, and found Fred standing on the
It's
side
hard to
of it.
understand.
Something in Fred's manner led me at once to think that I had better not have opened the door.
She shut the door quickly. In her innocence, Fanny could not have known that Lewis Powell, conspirator with John Wilkes Booth, intended to kill Secretary Seward. Powell began raining savage blows on Frederick's head with the muzzle of his gun.
I heard noises in the hall and thought perhaps maybe a servant was chasing a rat. Then I was afraid something was wrong, and being impatient to find out, started myself at the door.
Suddenly, two men side by side burst through the door. Instantly, Fanny recognized her brother Fred.
The side of his face was covered with blood, the rest very pale, his eyes full of intense expression. On his right hand was the assassin. He was rushing toward the bed where Father lay. I ran beside him to the bed, imploring him to stop.
Fanny, now in shock, watched in horror by the foot of the bed. Powell's murderous rampage was directed at the person she loved most in the world.
Then I knew it was not a dream, and I screamed.
Fanny's brother Augustus, awakened by the shrill shrieks of his sister, burst into the room. Grabbing Powell from behind, Augustus shoved him to the door. Powell fled the house and rode off on his horse. But inside the house, a horrific drama was still playing out.
Father looked so ghastly that I was sure he was dead. He was white and very thin with the blood that had drained from the gashes about his face and throat.
Fanny simply clung to one thing only.
When Dr. Verdi arrived, he told our huddled family that no artery was severed and that Father's wounds were not fatal.
After her father's wounds were dressed, a number of Secretary Seward's colleagues rushed to his bedside.
Standing at Father's bedside, I first heard about the president. One of the gentlemen telling Mother that he had been shot and was not expected to live.
In the background, they're playing Battle Hymn of the Republic. And when I first got this book trailer, the graduate student in the background had the music playing of Yankee Doodle. I get this blank look from people all the time. Yankee Doodle is like the Revolutionary War. Okay, this is like the Civil War. So we had some corrections we had to make, but anyway, it was fun doing that. And I had showed you the sample timeline, and we've used your own life for practice. What you can do is take your own historical figure or your own historical time, or like the research you're doing, and put it on the timeline. And the research is really important. You have tons and tons of research. It's really, the novel, the work is like 2/5 above the surface like an iceberg, but 3/5 of it is under the surface and you don't see it. Those of you that have written things understand that there's so much more under the surface than there is on top. Here's an example. On my timeline, I wrote that Fanny was wearing a blue silk dress on January 1st, 1863, while her father is upstairs signing the Emancipation Proclamation. And I had to read her diary carefully to make sure I got that fact straight. She was at a party, a fancy party, at the French ambassador's house on May 29th, 1864. And I learned from her diary that they were passing these elegant hors d'oeuvres on these mirrored plates. So that was a detail that I could put into the scene, and I knew, it would be accurate. And her very first diary entry, December 25th, 1858, began in a tiny room at the end of a second-floor hallway in the family's F Street house in Washington. Those details I got from her diary. She was 14 when she started. Yeah. And you have to also focus on emotional details. This was a very sad family story in many ways because her father was so prominent that he was never home. And her father was, I like to give the example of the Hillary Clinton, Barack Obama election, which was when? Was it 2008 or 2004?
2008.
Well, anyway, whenever it was, the idea was at first that Hillary Clinton would be the nominee. But Barack Obama swept into the political scene, and he was the one that captured the nomination. The same kind of thing happened in 1860. Nobody expected Lincoln to be the nominee. They expected Seward to be the nominee, Fanny's father. The reason why he wasn't the nominee was because he had a long history in politics. And the longer the history you have, the more stuff they can use against you. And he was Seward was very much in favor of emancipation. And of course, not everyone in the country was. So they would use that against him. The other thing that I think is interesting is Lincoln was only a one-time senator like Barack Obama, but Lincoln had the power of speech. The Lincoln-Douglas debates cast him on the national stage. He was brilliant, really, rhetorically, and so was Barack Obama. And when Lincoln won, he chose the senator from New York to be his Secretary of State. That was William Seward. And Barack Obama chose Hillary Clinton, the senator from New York, to be the Secretary of State. So there are a lot of real parallels in that. So anyway, I tried to focus on some of the emotional aspects in the story. One of the very sad things in the story, this is an emotional detail. Do you know about 1859, John Brown's raid on Harper's Ferry? John Brown was going to free the slaves, and he became a martyr in that cause. And Seward was very much an abolitionist, okay? And they had dogs in the family. They loved pets. But right about the time of, almost days after the John Brown raid on Harper's Ferry, somebody killed their family dog. And they think it was political retaliation because of his stand on slavery. So it was a very emotional event in the life of this young girl. She spends a lot of time in her diary talking about the death of the dog and why political enemies would be so cruel. And so anyway, my point is simply that you focus on scenes that have emotion. Okay. Oh, here's something that happened. There's another emotional connection. Doing the Seward book, I learned about Lincoln and how much he loved animals. And I wrote this book for children. It's called An Affectionate Farewell. Lincoln had a favorite horse called Old Bob. I learned this as I was working on the Fanny Seward book. And Old Bob was the very last horse that Lincoln rode out on the prairie when he was a prairie lawyer before he became president. And they were fast friends. He loved this horse. It was his favorite horse. And long and short, he goes and becomes president, and then he gets assassinated. But in the parade, leading the parade, when in front of his funeral cortege, at the end of his life, they brought back Old Bob. And so Old Bob was leading the parade to the cemetery after Lincoln died. And I would love to go there, but there's actually a statue of Old Bob in front of the soldiers' home in Washington, D.C. So I was in touch with a sculptor that did that statue when I was working on this book. I'm just trying to say there's an emotional part of it that kind of works. And then let's see what else I have. Yeah, this is what I wanted to show you. And Elizabeth, can you make this come up? You might want to write this down. If you are writing, one of the best things, if you're writing history and you like to go online, this is a wonderful site that will allow you to, I feel like I have my magician's assistant. It will allow you to go online, and I think I can make this, I don't know where you go down. How do I make it go down, Elizabeth? Yeah, scroll it. How do you make it scroll? Okay, keep going. What happens is, for example, this one, I believe, if you open it up, this is a way of capturing the history of the Tower of London. Is it coming open?
Oh, I don't know.
I don't know. And one of the things that you can do is you can record on this timeline when the tower was built, founded, what kings were around at the time, the Tower of London, you know, the famous beheadings in the Tower of London. And you can sort of capture all of that on a timeline, which is fun to do if you're, especially if you're young and you go online a lot. One of the things that you can do is you can actually take a family picture of you as a baby, you as a teenager, your sisters and brothers, the events that happened in your family, and you can do a family memoir. And to me, that's a history. And I think this site is fabulous for that. You know how you have those old pictures of you, at least if you were a little girl, of you in those little crinolines, you know, those starched crinolines, and you have the little white socks that are turned down. You have pictures like that. You have pictures of your family in front of their old cars, you know, which you thought were really cool back then, and all that kind of stuff. So you can put these, you can capture these online. I think it'd make a lovely gift for somebody or for your family, and it's, if you don't know what to do with all those photographs that are in your dresser drawers, that's something that you can do. So it's no mystery that writing historical fiction takes research and obsessive devotion to detail, but the effort is worth it. And that's not a mystery at all. And I want to show you, I was so proud of myself on this last slide, if I can make it applaud as we're done. Wait a second. It took me almost a whole morning to figure out how to incorporate a sound into it. No, here we go. Let's see if it's working. Nope. Well, Elizabeth, I'm doing it wrong. But anyway, one of the things that I did, I have a presentation I did. Can you make it? Anyway, I have a presentation I did for children based around this book. And I had pigs snorting, and I had horses neighing, and I did, and it was really, really fun. But it took me half a morning to learn how to put those noises on. Is it working? No, it's supposed to do applause, so we're done. Okay, so we're done.